When 27-year-old American architect Lisa Halaby married the King of Jordan in 1978 and became Queen Noor, the global media immediately sold the public a flawless, glittering fairy tale. The headlines painted a picture of a modern Cinderella, effortlessly swept away to a Middle Eastern palace where she would be draped in priceless, centuries-old diamonds and live a life of endless privilege. We are conditioned to believe that marrying a king means instantly inheriting a royal vault overflowing with historical treasures. But the reality behind those heavy palace doors was far more complicated. Royalty is rarely just about romance, and a crown is never merely a beautiful accessory. For Queen Noor, her jewelry box was not an inheritance of resting treasures. It was an arsenal she had to build entirely from scratch to survive a high-stakes game of royal diplomacy. Before we unlock the heavily guarded doors of this particular royal vault, it is important to note that the secrets and strategies we are exploring today have been carefully gathered from historical archives, personal memoirs, and decades of international press. However, the crown always casts a long, complex shadow, and history often hides in the unspoken details. If you recognize a missing piece of this historical puzzle, or if you hold a different perspective on these events, leave a comment below so we can continue to uncover the truth together. To understand the sheer weight of the jewelry Queen Noor would eventually wear, we must first look at the immense pressure she faced before she even put on a crown. Lisa Halaby did not walk into a court that was ready for a joyous new chapter. She was stepping into a kingdom that was quietly reeling from a profound national tragedy. Just over a year prior, King Hussein's beloved third wife, Queen Alia, had perished in a devastating helicopter crash. When the king proposed, he was a grieving monarch carrying the weight of a volatile geopolitical region and the responsibility of raising 8 children. Because of this, the young American architect did not give an immediate, breathless yes. It took her 18 agonizing days of deliberation to accept his proposal. She knew that accepting his hand meant stepping into an intense, invisible crossfire of public scrutiny. The love between them was deep and genuine, but the title she was about to take on offered no comfortable shelter. She was an outsider entering a deeply traditional world, and she understood that from the moment she said yes, every choice, every public appearance, and every piece of jewelry she wore would be relentlessly analyzed and translated into a political statement. If you look closely at the historical photographs from their wedding day on the 15th of June 1978, you will immediately notice something that completely defies Western royal expectations. When Princess Diana or Grace Kelly married, they were anchored by the sheer, blinding weight of massive diamond tiaras. But when Lisa Halaby walked into her ceremony, her hair was completely bare. There was no glittering tiara, and there was no exchange of heavy diamond wedding bands. Instead, the ceremony was rooted in a traditional, deeply pragmatic Islamic marriage contract, signed quietly and with profound intent. She wore a simple, elegant white silk gown by Dior, her hair falling naturally around her shoulders. However, the most fascinating detail of her bridal look, the true testament to her mindset and the opening move of her royal strategy, lay in a subtle, deliberate choice regarding her jewelry. As a wedding gift, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia had presented the bride with a spectacular, heavily jeweled pair of long diamond chandelier earrings. They were the absolute epitome of royal extravagance, designed to dazzle the eye, catch the camera flashes, and loudly declare the wealth of the region. Most newly minted royals, eager to prove their new status and solidify their place in the hierarchy, would have worn them exactly as intended. They would have let the cascading diamonds do the talking. But Lisa, now officially Queen Noor, the light of Hussein, did something entirely unexpected. Before she stepped out to face the world as the new Queen of Jordan, she took the magnificent gift and manually altered it. She deliberately removed the heavy, cascading diamond pendants that hung from the bottom, choosing to wear only the simple, modest diamond studs at the top. This was not a fashion mistake, nor was it a sudden lack of appreciation for high jewelry. It was the calculated move of a trained architect editing a design that was simply too loud. By dismantling a piece of overt, overwhelming opulence on her very first day as queen, she was sending a quiet but undeniably powerful message to the world and to the court that was quietly judging her. She was declaring, without speaking a single word, that she would not be swallowed whole by the extravagance of her new title. She was not there to simply be a beautiful mannequin for foreign influence or borrowed wealth. She was there to control her own narrative. Yet, surviving the intense, critical gaze of a wedding day is only the very first step. Representing a relatively young monarchy on the unforgiving stage of global diplomacy is an entirely different, far more dangerous challenge. How does a newly crowned queen, operating without a centuries-old vault of ancestral diamonds, stand shoulder to shoulder with the oldest, most intimidating empires in Europe? When the time came to face the world's most powerful monarchs, Noor realized that modesty would no longer be enough to protect her country's image. She needed a different kind of armor. And the answer to her problem lay in a brilliantly calculated, dazzling diplomatic illusion. The king's love for her was profound and protective. Unlike his approach to his previous marriages, King Hussein bestowed the title of queen upon her almost immediately, a shield of absolute royal authority to help her navigate her new reality. But while a husband's decree secures a title, it does not magically conjure centuries of royal heritage. When Queen Noor stepped onto the international stage, she faced a daunting diplomatic reality. The Jordanian monarchy was relatively young, and its royal jewelry collection, while beautiful, was modest compared to the sprawling, blood-soaked treasuries of the old European empires. When attending a state banquet alongside queens who wore diamonds literally pulled from the crowns of ancient emperors, how does a new queen project equal standing? If she arrived in simple, understated jewelry, she risked making her nation look fragile or subordinate in the unspoken, highly visual hierarchy of royal power. The solution was a breathtaking display of the illusion of ownership. When Queen Noor arrived for a highly publicized state visit to the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, she emerged wearing a staggering historical masterpiece, the Chaumet Talhouët tiara. Crafted in the 19th century for a French aristocratic family, the piece was a towering structure of diamond scrolls, culminating in a massive cushion-cut diamond resting at its peak. The international press captured images of a radiant, untouchable queen, dripping in the kind of antique majesty that usually takes a dynasty 300 years to accumulate. But the brilliant secret behind this flawless display of power, the tiara did not belong to the Jordanian royal vault. It was a strategic loan from the historic French jewelry house, Chaumet. Queen Noor understood that on the grand chessboard of global diplomacy, perception is often just as heavy as reality. By borrowing a piece of European history and wearing it with absolute unwavering confidence, she effectively leveled the playing field. She used the borrowed diamonds as an armor of equality, creating an optical illusion that shielded the young Jordanian monarchy and commanded immediate, unquestioning respect from the oldest courts in the world. Yet, winning the respect of foreign monarchs was only half the battle. Back home, she faced a much more complex and intimate challenge. The Jordanian public was fiercely loyal, but inevitably cautious. They were watching a woman born in Washington, D.C., educated at Princeton, suddenly seated beside their revered king. The unspoken question lingered in the air. Does this outsider truly belong to us? To conquer this domestic doubt, she could not use the icy, international language of white diamonds. She needed a medium that spoke directly to the soul of the region. She found it in turquoise. Throughout her early years on the throne, Queen Noor consistently bypassed traditional Western gems for cultural events, choosing instead to wear striking suites of turquoise necklaces, earrings, and brooches. In Middle Eastern history and tradition, turquoise is not merely a decorative stone. It carries deep spiritual weight. It is a symbol of protection, a stone anchored in local heritage, believed to ward off the evil eye. By consciously integrating heavy turquoise pieces into her refined wardrobe, she was executing a brilliant form of cultural diplomacy. She was not just wearing jewelry, she was wearing a silent pledge of allegiance. Every piece of turquoise was a visual promise that she was not there to impose Western ideals upon their court, but rather to weave herself respectfully into the ancient fabric of their culture. It was a shield forged from their own earth, designed to neutralize the skepticism surrounding her roots. Once she had secured both international respect and domestic affection, Queen Noor's position shifted. She was no longer just the king's new wife. She was a formidable partner, deeply involved in humanitarian work, education, and national development. She had outgrown the need for borrowed French tiaras and defensive cultural shields. It was time to forge a weapon of her own. It was time to solidify her identity. This era of unquestioned authority birthed her most iconic piece, the Diamond Sunburst Tiara. Unlike the heavy ancestral crowns of Europe, this piece had no ghosts attached to it. It was created specifically for her, featuring brilliant diamond rays radiating outward like a rising sun. It was a literal, blinding translation of her name, Noor, the Arabic word for light. When Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom visited Jordan in 1984, Queen Noor stood beside her wearing the sunburst tiara. She no longer needed to borrow history. She had created her own. But if you look closely at the archival photographs over the years, you will notice a fascinating detail about this specific tiara. It did not remain static. Originally designed with relatively even, graduating rays, the tiara was later deliberately altered. The structure was modified to include multiple, sharply graduated points, making the silhouette taller, fiercer, and undeniably more commanding. Just as the Queen's political and social footing grew sharper and more defined over the decades, her chosen crown evolved to mirror that strength. She had engineered a masterpiece that grew in tandem with her power. For over 2 decades, that brilliant light reigned over the Jordanian court. But the cruelest rule of royalty is that no era lasts forever. In early 1999, a tectonic shift occurred within the palace. King Hussein, the anchor of her world, was losing a long and agonizing battle with cancer just weeks before his passing. In a desperate bid to ensure the absolute stability of the nation, the king made a monumental decision regarding the line of succession. He removed his brother, Prince Hassan, from the position of crown prince and passed the title to his eldest son, Abdullah, born from his second marriage. With that single decree, the future shifted. The expectation that Noor's own son, Prince Hamza, would be the immediate next in line was delayed and ultimately dissolved. When King Hussein passed away, Abdullah II ascended the throne, and Queen Raiyah became the new reigning queen. Queen Noor transitioned into the role of Queen Dowager. The central spotlight of the monarchy moved away from her, and the golden era of the sunburst tiara quietly closed. In the sprawling history of European royalty, this is usually the chapter where a dowager queen locks her magnificent jewels in a dark vault, leaving them to gather dust as melancholic relics of a lost time. But Queen Noor was never a traditional royal, and she was not about to let her legacy turn into a ghost story. She understood that a true matriarch does not hoard power, she transfers it. Fast forward 21 years to July 2020, to the wedding of her daughter, Princess Raiyah. The world watched as the princess walked down the aisle, wearing a spectacular, deeply elegant diamond and sapphire bandeau tiara. To the untrained eye, it was simply a beautiful new piece of bridal jewellery. But jewellery historians immediately recognized the stones. The magnificent sapphire resting at the center of the princess's headpiece, and the surrounding diamonds, were not newly acquired. They had been surgically extracted from 2 of Queen Noor's most recognizable pieces from her golden era: a massive sapphire brooch she frequently wore during her reign, and a breathtaking, multi-gem Marina Bulgari collar necklace she had famously debuted in 1985. In a move of absolute strategic brilliance, Queen Noor had allowed the glittering armor of her past to be entirely dismantled. She broke down the very jewels that defined her peak authority, sacrificing their original, historical forms so they could be resurrected as a crown for her daughter. It was the ultimate long game. By dismantling her own jewellery, she ensured that even though the immediate line of succession had shifted, the physical weight of her legacy, her bloodline, and her era would continue to sit proudly on the heads of the next generation. The story of Lisa Halaby, the American architect who became the light of Hussein, proves a profound and beautiful truth about the nature of a crown. True royal power is never measured by the size of the vault you inherit on your first day. It is measured by your intelligence to borrow authority when your hands are empty, your courage to forge your own weapons when you reach the summit, and your absolute, unwavering grace to break it all down, so your legacy can be reborn when your era finally steps into the shadows. Looking at this incredible journey, Which of her strategic moves fascinates you the most? Was it the diplomatic illusion of the borrowed Chaumet tiara, the silent cultural pledge of the turquoise, or the heartbreaking but brilliant sacrifice of dismantling her greatest jewels for her daughter? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to continue unlocking the psychological warfare hidden inside the world's most guarded royal vaults, make sure to subscribe. The jewelry box is far deeper than it looks. The true weight of the Chaumet Talhouët tiara was not measured in carats, but in centuries of unspoken European dominance. When Queen Noor arrived in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, she was stepping into a den of ancient bloodlines. European royal courts operate on a currency of history. Their power is validated by vaults that have survived world wars, revolutions, and the fall of empires. For a young, American-born queen representing a Middle Eastern nation that had only gained full independence a few decades prior, the diplomatic terrain was incredibly treacherous. She could not simply arrive in a newly commissioned, modern diamond piece. In the unspoken, highly visual language of royal power, new money is often dismissed as fragile. She needed a piece of armor that could speak the ancient language of her hosts. The Chaumet Talhouët tiara was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Originally crafted in the early 20th century for a fiercely wealthy French aristocratic family, it was a towering architectural marvel. It featured sweeping, dramatic diamond scrolls that culminated in a massive, breathtaking cushion-cut diamond suspended at the very peak. It was the kind of tiara that demands physical submission from the woman wearing it. It dictates the posture, the tilt of the chin, and the slow, deliberate pace of her walk. When Queen Noor entered the state banquet wearing this borrowed masterpiece, she did not look like a newcomer asking for a seat at the table. She looked like an empress who already owned the room. The international press, easily swayed by the blinding flash of diamonds, immediately circulated photographs of the radiant Jordanian queen, entirely unaware that the crown on her head was a temporary lease on history. This illusion of ownership was a vital, calculated defense mechanism. By wearing a European antique, she neutralized the inherent condescension of the older courts. She forced them to look at her not as an outsider, but as an equal draped in the very same historical weight that they prided themselves on. But this diplomatic victory on foreign soil highlighted a much deeper, more intimate vulnerability back home. A borrowed French tiara might command respect in Luxembourg, but it meant absolutely nothing to the people of Jordan. In fact, relying too heavily on Western diamonds risked alienating the very citizens she was trying to win over. The Jordanian public was fiercely protective of their king and deeply skeptical of the woman he had chosen. They saw a woman educated in the Ivy League, born in Washington, D.C., and raised in a culture entirely foreign to their own. The unspoken fear was that she would attempt to westernize their court, to erase their traditions in favor of foreign aesthetics. She realized that to survive the intense, localized scrutiny of her new homeland, she had to completely abandon the icy, imperial language of white diamonds. She needed a talisman. She found it in the rich, opaque depths of turquoise. In the Middle East, turquoise is far more than a decorative gemstone. It is woven into the very psychological and spiritual fabric of the region. For millennia, it has been revered as a stone of absolute protection, a ward against the evil eye, and a symbol of grounded, earthly heritage. It does not reflect light away like a diamond. It absorbs it, offering a sense of warmth and localized power. Recognizing this profound cultural resonance, Queen Noor began to systematically weave heavy, elaborate turquoise pieces into her official wardrobe. During domestic cultural events, local engagements, and even selective state banquets, she bypassed the traditional diamond parures in favor of striking turquoise necklaces, massive cabochon earrings, and intricate brooches. This was not a superficial fashion trend. It was a deeply strategic, silent pledge of allegiance. When she wore turquoise, she was communicating directly with the citizens of Jordan in a language they inherently understood. She was physically demonstrating that she was not there to impose a foreign aesthetic upon their court. Instead, she was wrapping herself in their earth, their traditions, and their history. Every piece of turquoise she wore acted as a cultural shield, slowly and methodically neutralizing the curse of the outsider. She was proving that she could be the light of Hussein without casting a Western shadow over his people. As the years passed and her roots in the Jordanian soil deepened, the skepticism faded, replaced by genuine respect. She had mastered the art of the borrowed European tiara and the localized turquoise shield. She was no longer a newcomer navigating the precarious early days of a royal marriage. She was a reigning matriarch, a fierce advocate for humanitarian causes, and the undisputed partner to a seasoned king. She had earned the right to stop borrowing history and start writing her own. The era of defense was over. It was time to forge a weapon of absolute, unquestioned authority, one that would define her legacy for decades to come. The creation of the Diamond Sunburst Tiara was not merely a high jewelry commission. It was an architectural statement of permanent residency. When a queen finally reaches the absolute apex of her influence, she no longer needs to borrow the ghosts of French aristocrats, and she no longer needs to hide behind the defensive shield of cultural stones. She requires a crown that belongs entirely to her, a piece of armor with no prior history, no previous owners, and no lingering shadows. She needs a weapon forged specifically for her own era. The design she chose was breathtaking in its literal interpretation of her power. The tiara was constructed as a brilliant, radiating halo of diamond rays, shooting outward and upward like the rising sun. It was a flawless physical translation of the very name King Hussein had given her on their wedding day, Noor, the Arabic word for light. When she hosted Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom during a highly publicized state visit to Jordan in 1984, Queen Noor stood beside the British monarch, not in borrowed antique diamonds, but crowned in her own blazing light. She was looking eye to eye with the most famous monarch in the world, anchored by a masterpiece she had willed into existence. But the most fascinating secret of the Sunburst Tiara is that it did not remain a static object. Much like the Queen's own political footing, the crown evolved. If you look closely at the earliest portraits of the tiara, the diamond rays are relatively even, creating a gentle, luminous halo. However, years later, the tiara was quietly returned to the jewelers for a highly strategic alteration. The structure was modified to include sharper, taller, and more aggressively graduated points. The tiara was made taller, fiercer, and undeniably more commanding. This was a visual masterstroke, as her role shifted from a supportive wife to an active, formidable global force in humanitarian and political arenas. Her chosen crown was physically sharpened to mirror that exact trajectory. She had engineered a legacy that grew in exact tandem with her authority. For 2 decades, that brilliant light reigned over the Jordanian court. But the most unforgiving rule of any monarchy is that the center of power is always temporary. In the early months of 1999, the palace walls closed in around a devastating reality. King Hussein, the absolute anchor of Queen Noor's world, was losing a long, agonizing battle with illness. The atmosphere inside the royal court was tense, not just with grief, but with the terrifying fragility of the nation's future. In a desperate, final bid to ensure the absolute stability of his country, the king made a monumental and heartbreaking decision regarding the line of succession. With time running out, he removed his own brother from the position of Crown Prince, a title he had held for decades. But the crown did not pass to Prince Hamza, Queen Noor's eldest son, who many assumed was being groomed for the throne. Instead, the king named his eldest son, Abdullah, born from his second marriage, as the immediate heir. With that single stroke of the pen decree, the future shifted entirely. When King Hussein passed away, Abdullah II ascended the throne, and a new queen stepped into the center of the royal spotlight. Queen Noor, once the undisputed leading lady of the court, transitioned into the role of Queen Dowager. In the sprawling, often melancholic history of royalty, this is precisely the chapter where a former queen slowly fades into the background. It is the moment when the magnificent jewels of her golden era are locked away in dark, heavy vaults, destined to gather dust as beautiful but tragic relics of a lost time. The public assumes these pieces become untouchable, haunted by the memories of the power they once represented. But Queen Noor was never a traditional royal, and she was not about to let her life's work turn into a dusty museum exhibit. She understood a fundamental truth about royal survival. A true matriarch does not hoard power when her era ends. She strategically transfers it. Fast forward 21 years to a quiet private ceremony in July 2020. The world watched as Queen Noor's daughter, Princess Raiyah, walked down the aisle. The bride looked stunning, wearing a spectacularly elegant diamond and sapphire bandeau tiara that sparkled under the lights. To the untrained eye of the public, it was simply a beautiful, modern piece of bridal jewellery, perhaps a new acquisition for a new generation. But jewellery historians and keen observers of the royal court immediately recognized the stones, and the revelation was nothing short of brilliant. The magnificent, deep blue sapphire, resting at the very center of the princess's headpiece, along with the surrounding structure of diamonds, were not new at all. They had been surgically extracted from two of Queen Noor's most recognizable and heavy pieces of armor from her reigning years. The first was a massive, signature sapphire and diamond brooch she had frequently worn to command attention during official engagements. The second was a breathtaking, multi-gem Marina Bulgari collar necklace, a heavy, colorful statement piece set with rubies, citrines, and star sapphires that she had famously debuted at the absolute height of her power in 1985. In a move of unparalleled strategic brilliance, the Queen Dowager had allowed the glittering armor of her past to be entirely dismantled. She broke down the very jewels that defined her peak authority, sacrificing their original historical forms so they could be resurrected as a crown for her daughter. It was the ultimate, masterful long game. By dismantling her own spectacular jewelry, she ensured that even though the immediate line of succession had shifted away from her sons, the physical weight of her legacy, her bloodline, and her era would continue to sit proudly on the heads of the next generation. She refused to let her diamonds become ghosts. Instead, she turned them into the foundation for her daughter's future. The journey of Lisa Halaby, the young American architect who crossed the world to become the light of Hussein, proves a profound and beautiful truth about the nature of a crown. True royal power is never measured by the size of the vault you are handed on your very first day. It is measured by your intelligence to borrow authority when your hands are empty, your courage to forge your own sharp weapons when you finally reach the summit, and your absolute, unwavering grace to break those weapons down so your legacy can be reborn when your era steps into the shadows. Looking at this incredible, calculated journey, which of her strategic moves fascinates you the most? Was it the grand diplomatic illusion of the borrowed Chaumet Tiara, the silent, brilliant cultural pledge of the turquoise, or the heartbreaking but masterful sacrifice of dismantling her greatest jewels for her daughter's wedding day? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to continue unlocking the psychological warfare hidden inside the world's most guarded royal vaults, make sure to subscribe. The jewelry box is always far deeper and far more dangerous than it looks.